Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Jaden Rashada in that case against Florida, and how I think, although it creates a lot of questions and is not necessarily something you want in college football, is something that is super important to the future of college football for not only Jaden Rashada, but a ton of guys coming after him. So we'll break that down more and more as details come out about that case. But let's talk about Jim Harbaugh. And a very, very interesting story came out from John Talty as well as Armen Katiyan. I very much apologize. I absolutely did my best there, I promise. But they released a book entitled The Price, What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. And I think that's something that we all are interested in, right? There is definitely a big time confusion of what the right formula is to win in this new era. And he told a ton of very interesting stories about the new things that have happened. They include details around Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher, Lane Kiffin, Jaden Rashada's lawsuit, some of the stuff that built up into that, and then Jim Harbaugh and the end of his time at Michigan. And to me, this was the most interesting part of all of this. And obviously, there has been a ton of questions about Jim Harbaugh. A lot of people thought he just wanted to go to the NFL and was going to jump at the opportunity. Maybe it wasn't as clear cut as that. It sounds like there was a ton of stuff happening, even just right after the national title, where pretty much everyone around Jim Harbaugh was telling him it's time to ride off into the sunset. You've done everything that you wanted to do here. You've won the title. You can ride off. And obviously, with the Connor Stallions and sign stealing stuff that was kind of lingering on the under the surface, it made it even more of a beneficial move for Jim Harbaugh to move on. That being said, it sounds like Jim Harbaugh wasn't as keen as some other people were. Now, his attorney really did push him towards kind of leaving and finding another job and possibly, going to the Chargers, which is where he ended up. And the interesting thing about this is the attorney in all of this, Jim Harbaugh's attorney, definitely came forward and was very, very honest about the way that he felt this was going to go down if they let this kind of roll out. He said, he told Don Yee, who is Jim Harbaugh's agent, he basically said, if he comes back to Michigan, he is going to get punished, and they will do everything in their power to punish him, and do it to the best of their ability, whether it's 4 games or 6 games or whatever it looks like for the next season. He was going to be suspended for games, and they were going to make sure it was as many games as they could get over. I think all of us kind of saw that from the NCAA this last little bit, where they felt like they were a little bit out to get Jim Harbaugh. Now, he created a lot of that for himself, which I'll get into a little bit later, but the reality is it felt like they had a little bit of a vendetta. I'll be totally honest. Now, he did plenty of things that made them have that vendetta, but that's the reality, at least as I saw it. And I think it was there was a little bit of an undertone to all of the stuff happening around Jim Harbaugh, right? Even the championship that happened, there was always the undertone of Connor Stallions, that guy right there, and the effect that he had on this team in this season, and would they have won the title if they had Connor Stallions? If they didn't have him, would they be a bad team? Who knows? But the reality is there were a lot of stuff that went on in 2023, and I think if you take just 1 or 2 of those things out of Michigan's story in the 2023 season, not the national championship, of course, but if you take out Connor Stallions, which is a huge thing to do, but let's just do it for fun here. If you take out Connor Stallions, if you take out a confusing relationship with the AD and Ward Manuel, which we'll get to here in a second, I think he might still be in Ann Arbor. Now, $16 million to coach an NFL team is not necessarily something you turn your nose up at by any means, but it sounded like Jim Harbaugh wanted to stay put. There was just too many confounding factors around it to make that the best decision for him. So during this time, he went on kind of a 2-day vacation, kind of like Nick Saban did with his wife, and he talked to one of his longtime friends, Todd Anson, and basically it was just a rant. It was essentially just a big-time rant against, not necessarily against, but just talking about Ward Manuel, that guy right there, the AD over at Michigan, and saying it just felt like he didn't have his back the way that he would have liked, especially coming up on some discussions where Ward Manuel is going to be a huge part of those in making what the negotiating with the NCAA is probably the best way to put it. Putting it in their hands rather than the NCAA hands. A lot of things could have happened, and Ward Manuel would have been the person to make all that stuff happen. So if from Jim Harbaugh's perspective, he felt that Ward Manuel wouldn't have been too kind to him in those discussions, I don't necessarily blame him for being a little bit worried about that. Tony Petitti obviously was going to have to suspend him at some point, and he already did it before with a 3-game suspension to start the year, but it was going to have to happen. I think we can all agree on that. It is obviously something that really shocked the college football world, and if you just let it kind of go by the wayside, you're doing everyone a disservice. So I fully understand that. It sounds like Jim Harbaugh, right after that outburst to Anson, as it was put in this book, he took his interview with the Chargers, and it just felt like everything kind of fell into place from there. It felt like he had a ton of really, really confounding factors in this where he wants to be at Michigan. He is a Michigan guy. He played for them. He is, everything about him is Michigan. But the reality is sometimes you got to just make decisions that are somewhat self-preserving, somewhat are just the better decision for you. And I'm sure it helps that that is the franchise that he played for. So a lot of things went into this. But the reality is it sounds like Jim Harbaugh was not as keen to leave Michigan as honestly I thought. I thought it was really just a matter of the right NFL job opening up, and once the Chargers did, I definitely felt like he was running to those offices to get that job. Now, I'm not saying that he was not very keen on getting that job or very interested in that job, but it sounds like it was a little bit more of a murky situation. Michigan offered him a good contract to make him the highest paid coach in the country at about $11 million a year, which has since been jumped by Kirby Smart. But the reality is there were a lot of confounding factors in those last couple of days. It wasn't just, get me an interview with the Chargers, get me an interview with every team out there and see where I land. It was really, him fighting between two parts of himself. The part that really wants to continue what he started at Michigan and really wants to keep that tradition rolling and be one of the top coaches in the country, easily number 2 behind Kirby Smart. But also, with all of the stuff happening around that program, all of the stuff happening around him, and the worry that if you come back, get suspended for 6 games, don't necessarily have the year that you had, are those offers going to come through the same? Is all of those confounding factors led him to LA. And I think, frankly, he made the right decision for himself, especially with all of the stuff going on around him. Being able to get rid of that headache is huge. Now, the question obviously will be, what if? What if I'm glad the Connor Stallions thing was figured out, but what if it wasn't? What if we had no idea that that was a part of their championship run, and Jim Harbaugh looks like just one of the best coaches ever, and that team looks like one of the most interesting teams of all time, where it's not necessarily the most outright talented, but a lot of leaders, a lot of tough guys, a lot of people that do the things the right way. And I don't know. It's going to be a what if, and it's a very, very interesting what if, because who knows what would have happened to Michigan if Harbaugh was still there. I mean, I frankly think they're in a really good position with Sharon Moore going forward, but it would have been fascinating storyline to see Jim Harbaugh going back to Michigan after flirting with the NFL for a 4th time, finding his way back to Michigan. But it sounds like some confounding factors just got in the way of that. So it's very, very interesting. It's one of those things that is always going to be a what if, is always going to be a hypothetical, but is definitely one that I think Michigan fans will start to unpack here pretty shortly. If Sharon Moore doesn't necessarily hit the way they want to, they'll be thinking about this. If the next 5 years don't go the way that they wanted to, they'll be thinking about this. And it's obviously not the situation that you want Jim Harbaugh to be in to make this decision, but sometimes it's a little bit about self-preservation, and he found that in LA. So obviously a very interesting story. Doesn't necessarily change anything for the future. It just is one of those things. You got to wonder what if a couple of these things didn't happen, and the Michigan story is a little bit cleaner than it is today. But that's a very interesting thing. We'll definitely break down how Sharon Moore is doing, and maybe if that starts to creep into some fans' mind around there. But we're going to take our 3rd break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about recruiting. Tons of stuff have been happening around the country. We're going to take you around to some big-time decommitments, some quarterbacks that are still out there to be had, as well as some big-time camps that are coming up. So we'll break all that down right after this, so stick with us.